This is Ayah 180 from Surah Al-Baqarah, mandating the ruling on writing a bequest or a will for the parents and near relatives. The thing is, it would be a sin if you did indeed follow the ruling in this ayah and wrote a bequest for your parents and near relatives. But how's that possible? Well, because as it was revealed later in Surah An-Nisa, Allah appointed for everyone who has a right what is due to them in terms of inheritance. So you can't just appoint something other than what Allah has decreed. So now, this is what you're supposed to follow, not that. And if we did, it would be a sin. So now is the question, how is this possible? And does this mean that Allah, may He be exalted, as they claim, has changed His mind? Well, definitely not. This is what is called النسخ or abrogation. But then if Allah never changes His mind, may He be exalted, why not just reveal the ruling that was meant to be in the first place? Well, if there is a patient needing a certain medication, let's say X, but because the patient's body may not handle this medication properly at this stage, the doctor has to first prescribe a different medication, let's say Y, which would help the patient be ready and be able to handle the treatment and then receive X to be treated properly. Now, it would be quite silly to say that the doctor here prescribed Y and then he changed his mind and prescribed X, because this is not the case. The doctor did this for the patient's benefit so that he can be treated properly. So it was for his own good. Now, from this simple analogy, we can understand some of the wisdom behind the existence of abrogation, which is preparing the people and the community for new rulings and gradually mandating them, giving the best chance to follow and obey. Like what had happened with the prohibition of alcohol, which was done in 4 stages. The first stage was actually recognizing its existence, but separating it from good provision, which subtly states that it is not good. Then, the next stage, saying that in spite of containing some benefit, its sin is greater, discouraging people from drinking and preparing them for the prohibition. Then, prohibiting praying while being intoxicated, leaving a very small room for doing it during the day, but it wasn't still fully prohibited. And then finally, when alcohol had already become a secondary part of their lives, it was completely prohibited. And just like that, through these gradual steps, the community, which was once heavily rooted and invested in alcohol since pre-Islam, it was then able to immediately follow the prohibition without any resistance or economic losses, since it happened gradually. Now, compare this to the man-made application when trying to deal with the same problem, but here in just one step. I'm referring to what is known as the Prohibition era, when the United States attempted, and ultimately failed, to prohibit the consumption of alcohol from 1920 to 1933. This led to widespread social unrest, with many people and even some states refusing to comply. It resulted in significant economic losses, the rise of black market, and ultimately the repeal of the law in 1933. So, abrogation in itself is a big blessing. Whether to an easier, harder, or even equally the same ruling, it is still a blessing. And it happens in 3 ways. Abrogation of both the ruling and the ayat, abrogation of the ruling but not the ayat, and abrogation of the ayat but not the ruling. So let's explore what each of these 3 types means to really understand what this concept means. The first type is abrogation of both ruling and the ayah in the Quran. And this type of abrogation is called al-insa, or in English, causing to forget, which means that the ayah is literally taken from everyone's chests, that they cannot remember it anymore, as if it didn't exist. And we know about this because of this ayah. ما ننسخ من آية أو ننسها نأتي بخير منها أو مثلها. And if you think this is a bit strange or impossible, just keep on reading the same ayah. ألم تعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير. And there was also an incident reported in Tafsir Al-Baghawy on a group of Sahaba who wanted to recite a surah, but all what they could remember from this surah was Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And so they were alarmed and directly went to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, to ask him about this, to which he then said that it was among what was abrogated. So the ayah and its ruling have been abrogated and everyone was made to forget them. The second type of abrogation is the ruling but not the ayah. And one of these cases is what we discussed at the beginning of this lesson, where the ayah remains an ayah of the Quran and we are rewarded for reciting it and we can pray using it, but we are not supposed to apply it. But then, if we're not supposed to apply this ayah, why has it remained part of the Quran then? Well, Allah chose to leave it as part of the Quran to show us His wisdom in making the rulings gradual, showing us how merciful He is and having the knowledge of all things. The third type of abrogation is of the verses but not the ruling, which is indicated in the Sahih report from Umar ibn al-Khattab mentioning a quote that used to be part of the Quran but not anymore. If an old man and an old woman to commit adultery, zina, stone them both. But we know that this quote no longer exists and cannot be considered an ayah or Quran. But the ruling of stoning is not abrogated. Finally, now that we know that abrogation entails ayat that have been caused to be forgotten, rulings that no longer apply, and ayat that are no longer part of the Quran, does that mean that abrogation contradicts the preservation of the Quran mentioned in this ayah? And the answer is certainly not. Allah has preserved the Quran from anyone to edit or remove anything from it. And this has nothing to do with abrogation or nasakh, simply because abrogation is part of wahy itself. It is a ruling from Allah, and it is not anyone else's input. That's why Allah says, سَنُقْرِئُكَ فَلَا تَنْسَى إِلَّا مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ, which is, as interpreted by many scholars of tafsir, a direct reference to abrogation. Thanks for watching. If you want to start learning the tajweed, then start with this playlist. And also, don't forget to check my latest book about tajweed and download the companion app. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.